The meeting will come to order of June 30th, the Ways and Means Committee. And just for edification of some of the councilors, this meeting was called because of time restraints on this bond issue, which I'm not happy about, and I'm sure the council's not, that you get stuff put in front of you and then you're told, you got a gun at your head, you have to take a vote. Just want to state that I'm not happy. Talked to many of the councilors, we're not happy up here about it. Not how it's supposed to work. Still waiting for information from the city auditor for months. CDM, if they thought they gave us the information we asked for, shame on them. But that being said, this meeting had to be called. There will be a meeting called tonight at 6 o'clock to take a vote on this. And with that being said, I just want to introduce the committee members that are here: Councilor Arrigo, Councilor Ganasso, Councilor Morabito, myself. Councilor Patch, unfortunately, is on vacation, and Councilor Powers is also in attendance. With that being said, the things we're here to discuss are the loan orders: CWSRF Fund number 3908, 3909, 3910. I see Mr. Leone, the attorney. Could you come up to the podium? I have a few questions for yourself. I did receive the letter that you sent to us last Tuesday. So somebody got a hold of you right away and basically said that we could be in, subject to a fine and stuff. Here's my question to you. We spent last year almost 12, 13 million. I'm not sure if we spent it or not. We appropriated it. These are things I'm looking for information, which we haven't received yet. Now, the year before that was 6 point something million. The year before that, 6 point something million. Is there anything that would subject us to fines that says we got to spend 17 million this year?
The city entered into a consent decree with the United States of America in 2010. That consent decree requires the city to present a program for investigating and correcting the problems associated with the collection system. The city has a very old collection system. It's a system with a lot of leaks and a lot of problems, which leads to a condition that led to a finding by the Department of Justice that we were creating a violation of the Clean Water Act. The consent decree requires the city to submit a plan and a schedule for investigation and correction of the problems throughout the entire city. The city and its engineer and its public works department developed a schedule and a plan to conduct a complete investigation and a system of repairs across the city of Revere over a period of about 10 years. Each one of those 10 years involves an amount of money to replace pipes, to reline pipes, to replace pump stations and the like. The actual selection of streets, the particular pumps, those are decisions that are made by the city and the city staff. And it is expected that approximately 10% of the problem is solved in each of those 10 years in accordance with the schedule submitted to the United States of America. The city has an opportunity to borrow money from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts at very advantageous rates, cheaper than it would cost the city to borrow the money on the open market or to issue bond anticipation notes. In part, that's because the city is eligible for getting principal forgiveness from the Commonwealth. So whereas the state revolving fund, the so-called SRF loan program, makes available funds for cities and towns across the Commonwealth to borrow money for fixing water and wastewater problems at 2% a year, we're able to actually get the rates down below 2%, as opposed to, say, 3% or thereabouts if the city were to borrow the money on the open public market. The city every year, as I indicated, is required to meet its milestones under the consent decree. If we fail to meet milestones, the city is subject to stipulated penalties under the consent decree, and the city is also subject to a possible determination that we're, frankly, dragging our feet or refusing to undertake the work that we have promised and committed to do. And these are commitments that were made 4 years ago, unfortunately. I certainly was not involved in the negotiation of the decree, but I'm very familiar with its terms. It is simply our view that the city has to continue to demonstrate compliance with a consent decree to perform the studies and to conduct the repairs that are necessary on an annual basis. I want to make it clear, the borrowing that was, the authorization that's requested tonight the authorization to borrow that was requested apparently a week ago, was done to take advantage of the state revolving fund, the Water Pollution Abatement Trust loan program. I want to be clear, the city doesn't have to borrow the money from the Commonwealth. You can borrow the money through bond issuance, other forms of debt that the city can incur, but it would be at a higher rate.
No, I understand that. My thing is the amount.
The amounts are effectively, the best way for me to put this, if you were to correct all of the problems that have been identified by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, by the United States of America, and by the city itself, it could cost, and I'm sure you've heard this number before, $80 million, $90 million. You've got a very old, leaky system. And a lot of other cities and towns in Massachusetts have old, leaky systems, particularly cities as old as Revere. It's no fun, but it's going to cost a lot of money to fix. And the question is, can I stop? No, I can't stop. I have to do the work. What's the cheapest, most effective way to get the work done? In bite-sized pieces and borrowing the money from the Commonwealth. And it's money that's available to us now. There's also some money available from the MWRA. So when I learned that the deadline was today for authorization to borrow money from the Commonwealth, I simply wanted to point out that at this point in time, it's not in the city's interest to indicate to the governments that the city is no longer intends to perform the work that we had indicated we would perform in fiscal year 15.
There wasn't any intent of the council, but let me just go back 4 or 5 years from today. And Mayor Imbasino was actually the mayor at the time.
He was.
I had discussions on this consent order with the mayor back then. And back then it was $50 million explained to me over the next 10 years we would have to spend.
5-0?
5-0. This is from, like I said, 4 or 5 years ago. We're up to that amount now, and we're only into it for 4 years.
Right.
That's what scares me. The second thing is the amount that we're spending. I don't even know if we can do that much work in the course of a year. These are questions I have. These aren't questions for you, but they're questions for the company doing it. The other question I have is we're not mandated by a consent order to have CDM Smith do 100% of the work, are we?
The city has its choice in who to engage to do all this work. The physical work that's actually done is done by contractors that are selected in the public bidding process. CDM, and
there's not a bidding process needed in this, is what I'm told. No, maybe I'm told something.
With monies that are made available by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the regulations require that the work be put out for public bid. Lowest qualified bidder gets the work. There are some exceptions where there is emergency work that's to be done, in which case there are emergency work, there's authorization to conduct emergency work without having to go out for competitive bid. The work that we're talking about that's going to be authorized is not emergency work. This is work that's been programmed and expected for quite some time. And it's basically the selection process of the projects has taken place over the prior 12-month period.
Okay. And correct me if I'm wrong. This consent order, and put this in layman terms for the public to understand it, was put in place by the federal government because over the past, say, 100 years, or whatever it may be, we didn't do anything.
The city did something.
Well, they did very little, evidently. So they said, if you're not going to do it, we're going to force you to do it. Here's a mandate that we're going to have, the mandate's the city to do it. And basically what that's telling you, that mandate to consent from the federal government, federal judge, is telling you, show me a good faith effort. That's basically what I'm looking for, a good faith effort that this city is going to take on these tasks to fix the problems that haven't been fixed over the years. Now, I would think spending $6 to $7 and $8 million a year is a good based effort, plus with the DPW, and you mentioned yourself, doing a lot of work down there that could be also funneled into this consent order that work is being done. Those are the different points that I have, because at this rate we're going, 6 million, 6 million, 12 million, to 17 million, to I don't know where. And my problem is if we as a city council collectively, with the mayor, and the mayor's called for a summit, and I'm glad he did, I talked to him about this, and because we just can't give open book checks. And I'm sure if you went and said we spent $50 million in 4 years, when we thought that's what we had to spend, I think it's a good base faith effort. So I think slowing this down, and the mayor went to Washington to talk to all federal delegations to try to spread this out over years, because I mean the seniors in the city can't afford the water rates they're paying now, never mind this being tacked on. And I know it's being less because you're borrowing it less, but eventually when you're talking 50 to 100 million and there's not an end to it, I mean, it's going to get substantial no matter what you're paying for interest rates. But I want to thank you. I'm going to leave it open up to other councils. I want to thank you for being forthcoming and letting us know that, you could be. Let me ask you one other question, because I am going to amend this when we vote on this tonight, and it'll be up to the council if they stick with me, that we're voting on a bond that should go off a bond.
We're voting to borrow money from the company.
Correct.
Right. Loan order.
Now, what I'm going to do is have this council put an amendment on it that any money spent out of it come back here with the project number and how much it's going to cost. We're on for bid. Are we in our legal rights to do that? Thank you. Councilor Granasso.
Oh, I would think so. Obviously, that's so-called commonly referred to as oversight review. So that is one of our responsibilities. The thing that we, Attorney Leon, what we keep on referring to was the court decree in which the illegal uses of the water lines was occurring within our community. And a big focus of attention seems to be placed upon the sub pumps. How about the illegal apartments that are creating twice as much activity there? I think in terms of what we have to start investigating is ways of reducing the effort that we're looking for. I just find that there's so many easy words being said here and a lot of money being spent, and it seems to me like and I was very outspoken about CDM being, they discover the problem, they fix the problem, they have the oversight of the problem. And I subsequently have learned that you do go out to private bid. You go out and the lowest bidder receives the job.
Right.
But in the person who's doing the oversight for us is selected by the city, is CDM. So that resolves one of the issues of what I had, because it didn't seem practical that all three facets of the job would be done by one concern.
Right.
So now, and when they come up with these figures, and they're throwing at us 8 million, 12 million, 2.5 million, how do they come in and do the price review? That's the thing that, who comes up with this figure?
Well, let me certainly I want to first respond by suggesting to you that the process is pretty much laid out. It's the same process across the Commonwealth. And cities and towns across the Commonwealth traditionally engage in consulting engineering firms when they have a responsibility to fix an infrastructure problem. You conduct a study, you figure out how big the problem is, what the range of solutions are, and then to the extent there's an engineering solution, replacing a pump station, relining a pipe, replacing a pipe, putting in a bigger pipe. And I want to address your question about illegal apartments and sump pumps, because I think it's really a critical issue in Revere. Once those problems are identified, you have an engineering firm identify that you select a preferred solution, and then there's an estimate that your engineering firm comes up with. It's my understanding to date that the actual total amount estimated to fix these problems is in excess of $34 million. The actual costs that have come in from competitive bidding has been less, about $27 or $28 million. And I think at this point, the city has taken advantage of a very competitive market out there, which a lot of other cities and towns have taken advantage of. Engineers don't set prices. Typically what they'll do is they have an estimating process that comes up with the best estimate of what it's likely to cost, so that people like George will know how much money to set aside to pay for the fix of the problem. And I think that the city has done well, considering what's going on around the Commonwealth, to basically stay on top of the cost of these solutions. Now, I want to make it clear that the way in which this consent decree is structured, it doesn't give the city multiple choices. It doesn't say that the city has the ability to decide how much to spend or how quickly they have to spend the money. Unfortunately, and I am not a defender of this consent decree, believe me, I have a very critical view of that consent decree. I think it's unfair and I think it's unreasonable. I think that when it was negotiated, it failed to recognize that at the time it was entered into, the city really didn't have a good view of how big the problem was and how long it would reasonably take to correct the problems. But I will say this, that with respect to what EPA and the DEP thought, there was a series of problems, a series of causes for the problems that Revere is experiencing. It's a lot of illegal connections to the collection system, and those are sump pumps. And I know that people have water in their basements. I know that sometimes you get sewer backups in those basements, and they got to get rid of it. And what do? They basically continue to throw it in the street, and when they have water in their basements and no other place to put it because we don't have a good drain system in Revere, they put it into the sanitary wastewater system. That collectively creates a lot of problems. There's not enough capacity in our collection system to handle all the storm water that people are throwing in there, and a lot of other connections. Our sanitary wastewater system in Revere is designed to handle just sanitary wastewater, not basement stormwater, not street drains or anything. So there's a lot of that has to get out. In addition, you got a lot of broken manholes, you got a lot of broken pipes, you got a lot of leaky pipes, a lot of groundwater and surface water gets into that collection system. That's why we have this. The city, by generally speaking, should be generating about 7.5 million gallons of sanitary wastewater, 6.5 million gallons of sanitary wastewater based on your population. We're seeing a much larger number because you got a lot of groundwater, a lot of storm water, and a lot of basement drains that are going into that collection system. It shouldn't be the case. You pull all that stuff out, we still have a problem.
Oh, yeah, we have a problem based on the fact that we have some homes, not to interrupt you, Attorney Leon, but we have some homes when there's 30 people living in a single family, and this has only occurred in the last 3 or 4 years, 5 years, and when you go up to a home that used to be a two-family, you see about 6 mailboxes there. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that there's a lot of people living in this household, and when there comes people, becomes water usage. So what's happening is these individuals, these homeowners, are placing an unfair burden on the rest of the ratepayers within our city because they're overpopulating a given area. I mean, in the conditions of standard of living, I see in a lot of areas, and I'm very, very upset with that. It's lowering our standard of living, to be honest with you.
Well, you have zoning to enforce, and your Board of Health has the state sanitary.
Board of Health, and I call them all the time because to me it gets me personally, and I think that we've been charged with a responsibility to be fair with people. But this is getting out of control now. There's so much overcrowding in one particular home or two particular homes, and this happens at every street of our community. And so, well,
unfortunately, our collection system has to be sized to handle the domestic discharges in the entire city. I mean, that's just the way it goes. And unfortunately, if we have a larger population, we have to have a collection system that handles the flow from a larger population.
And again, to add insult to injury, one more point, Mr. Chairman, to add insult to injury, the people who are paying for this bill are law-abiding citizens, and it's generally speaking these individuals that are violating our city rules of order aren't, and that's unfair.
I would respond because one thing that I certainly learned about was the city has an amnesty system. There are thousands and thousands of households in the city of Revere that discharge storm drains and sump pumps and roof leaders into the sanitary system illegally and inappropriately. Until the end of 2015, the ratepayers are paying to remove those illegal connections. If the city just chose after that to fine and penalize the individual homeowners, then those homeowners would be the ones paying for that correction and not the ratepayers of the city of Revere.
And that in itself, I think, is an injustice. We've given much too long a time to correct the problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Rigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Attorney Leon, for being here tonight. A couple of questions pop in my head as we have gone through this and looking at the amount of money that we've approved in bonds or that we've been allowed to borrow, and we don't know how much has been encumbered or how much has been spent so far. But if we were to assume we've borrowed a little over $37 million. If we have spent, say, half of that, would we be showing compliance, or would we be showing a good faith effort if we were to plan to spend that money, that other half of the money that hasn't been spent yet? And I understand that there's a schedule, and I just wonder if there's any. I mean, if we've only spent, say, a third or a half of the money, we're still going to be spending money in the calendar year. We're going to still be spending money in the fiscal year. I know it's not necessarily to the schedule that's been laid out, but is there any argument that could be made that by spending some of the money that we've made, I think, more than a good faith effort. We've borrowed $37 million. We want to plan to spend the rest of that money before we start bonding more. Is that an argument that could? Is there an argument that could be made?
I wish I could say the answer is yes. I wish that EPA and DEP felt that good faith was all that really mattered. I genuinely believe, in my view, that the city continues to proceed in good faith with compliance with the consent decree. I'm very strongly of that belief. Unfortunately, the consent decree doesn't measure the city's progress by good faith gestures. The consent decree requires that the city submit a schedule and a plan, and DEP requires that we submit a schedule and a plan, and that we borrow money. We submit these plans for individual pieces of work. DEP reviews them, EPA reviews them. DEP has to approve, obviously, for the SRF program. They're the ones that are going to be loaning the city the money. All these funds are earmarked to specific projects that have been identified in the work plan that EPA and DEP have already seen. So my concern is that although we can fall back and say, well, we're really not going to move as quickly as you might have expected us to work, or that we promised, we are making good faith gestures. Unfortunately, and I'm only saying this from their perspective, not mine, their view is that they hear good faith all the time. They want to see measured progress, and they actually believe that the city was not very good in the years leading up to the administrative order and the consent decree, and I think that was mentioned earlier. We're being somewhat penalized for slow action over the last 30, 40 years. So, but I wish that were the case, but the answer is no. They continue to expect basically marching forward with these schedules and commitments.
Thank you. And so in terms of the amounts that have been spent, I know this is not necessarily a question for you, but I think, Mr. Chairman, what you've been asking for doesn't seem like it's a very big task to fill. I think in my mind, it's the amount of money that we've borrowed, which we have, and the amount of money that's been spent, and maybe what's been encumbered. And for $37 million, I cannot see how that's very difficult to do. But one other comment that I want to make is that Council Guanasso actually mentioned peer review or price review, and I think that we would be very well suited to look at the idea of a peer review. I know it is expensive and it can cost money to do that, but when we're talking about the amount of money that we're spending, and we're talking about the fact that our budget has just gone up $7 million, I do think that a check such as a peer review would be, that may cost $100,000 or $500,000 or $750,000 a year. That would be money well spent if it saves money in the out years in terms of construction costs. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for putting forward what you will put forward as far as an amendment. I think that it goes in the right direction and takes the right step towards some oversight. And I look forward to hearing what my colleagues have to say. Thank you.
Council, thank you. Council Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the outset, let me say that I intend to support your proposed amendment, because I think when you're spending this type of money, whether it's a small or large municipality, $37 million is a lot of money. And if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Finance Director, that money is paid back through our enterprise fund. Am I correct? Okay. Well, actually, if it's forgiven, then it's not paid back, but most of it is paid back. Am I correct? And I think that the people in this city already are drowning with water and sewer rates. You talk to people on the street, and all I hear every day is, I got my water, why is it so high? Why is it so high? And it's a very difficult thing to make people understand that we're doing this work. Particularly, and I'll direct this question to the consultant, how much of this money is actually being used for collapsed catch basins, for cleaning the Eastern and County ditch and the Central County ditch, for a pump station down at Martin Street? I'd like to know what the plans are with regard to that, because I've looked at a catch basin on the corner of Agawam and Sagamore Street that has been collapsed at least 12 inches from the surface of the roadway for the past year. And I see markings on it, but I don't see anything being done. And I dare say that if a heavyweight truck were to park there, the wheel would probably go into the catch basin. I have another one down on Tapley Avenue, same condition. I mean, I just don't understand. We're spending all of this money, and in my opinion, we're not correcting the problems that are directly affecting the residents of this city. And I believe I'd like that question answered by the consultant from CDM Smith, please.
Good evening, Councilor. There were many questions that you had in your request. With respect to the catch basins, typically that's a process in the stormwater system where the DPW does most routine repairs like that, from collapses, that type of thing. Where we've been focusing more of the work is on the sewer system because of the requirements in the consent decree to fix collapses in the sewer, and more of the maintenance work is done by the DPW.
Excuse me, I'm a little confused because I heard Attorney Leone mention catch basins a few minutes ago.
Yes, it doesn't mean every single catch basin isn't. It's certain areas when we do projects, there's some catch basin work, but the majority of the work has been in your sewer system, not in your drainage systems where catch basins lie, based on the problems that you have.
I understand that. Now, let's get back to the Eastern and Central County ditches.
Yes. Those ditches are not owned, all of them, by the city. What we're trying to do is work with the DPW and engineering to do some cleaning and inspections of them this year. So the planning grants that are on the table for funding this year, part of the loan notice before you tonight would pay for that. Likewise, the pump station and tide gate at Martin Street would be part of the construction monies. We're still working with the engineering department on exactly what the pieces of construction will be and what the costs are. And as those are finalized, we'll work with the city engineer to make sure you have that information.
I believe that the ditch that runs from Wonderland down through Lower Revere Street, the Bay Road area, out to Arcadia Street, and then there's a trash rack down there, and it runs under out to the B&M Tide Gates, that place out there. Now, is that part of what we're looking at doing?
That's part of the area that we're looking into.
Because I think that's a very serious problem, because when the water cannot flow through that to get out to that tide gate, backs up in people's homes and their basements. And it's bad enough that they're paying these exorbitant water and sewer rates, but they still have sewerage and water in their basement. That's criminal as far as I'm concerned. Thank you, Thank you.
Thank you, Council. Council President Sambudo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to go over a couple of things here to try to get a handle on a couple of things that were said. Now, we borrowed some money that hasn't been spent yet. Is that correct?
The total amount of construction borrowing was $31.7 million if you added up all the years, including the Winthrop Ave repair. Of that, we've spent 28-point-something million dollars. So we came in roughly $2.8 million under budget from what we assumed the cost would be. And those costs, in addition to being reviewed by the city, are also reviewed by Mass DEP each year. So there are several steps of review in terms of the cost of those repairs. So we've spent roughly 8 to 10% less than we anticipated to date.
So I guess my point is, has somebody absconded with this extra money?
No, the money is still there, and it's not.
Well, that's what I'm trying to find out, because it sounds like we've got a problem with the money. It's just that Now, the other point I want to try to bring up is that you've estimated the next phase of work is these bond authorizations. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so I understand my colleague, the chairman's point, and he wants a review of the money spent. But the way it sounds to me is some of this money won't be spent for a couple of years or so. Is that correct?
Usually what happens is the construction money is about a year behind. So monies that you would authorize tonight, the city won't actually sign the construction contract until the April 1 deadline of next year. So the actual money would start to be spent next year. That's
Right.
correct.
So I guess I was trying to get out there that we're not just borrowing money for the sake of borrowing money. These are part of the consent decree, and if we don't do this, we're in violation of that consent decree. I don't think a lot of people, I mean, my colleagues certainly understand that, but a lot of the citizens out there think that we're borrowing $17 million because we want to have it in a kitty to do this construction as if we want to do it. This is all part of the plan and has to be done at a certain period of time in order to be in compliance with this unfortunate and very restrictive and nasty plan that they've stuck us with, and hopefully in some way we can modify it. I'm not sure that will happen, but I certainly hope so.
No, that's correct. The consent decree planning document that was reviewed by the city and submitted last year lays out the work that needs to happen each year and every year so that the dollar amounts aren't specified, but the projects are laid out on an annual basis, and they're prioritized to a certain degree based on input from the city and other factors to make sure we fix sort of problems in the worst first and move on down the list, recognizing that we have to move certain things around and serve the entire city. But generally speaking, the worst of the worst problems are fixed each year on an annual basis.
Okay, so let me just try to wrap this up in such a way that if it doesn't sound like this, right now, who reviews what's done in work and in dollars and so forth? Can you give me a handle on just who looks at what you're doing besides us, besides our local people, the city engineer, the city planner, the DPW superintendent? Who else reviews this?
Sure. In addition to that mandate that you said for the internal review that the council put forth last year, everything is reviewed by the DEP. So every year, annual borrowing, before you're even offered the money, they review what's being proposed to make sure it's consistent with the decree. And then one of the reasons you keep getting the money on an annual basis is because you're under the consent decree and they recognize that there are major problems to be fixed in the city. So you don't even make the list unless you qualify. Then once you do, after the council approves the funding, there's a process that is gone through to submit an application that's reviewed by the DEP, and then you get what's called a permission to advertise. So they won't even let you advertise the project to get those competitive bids that Attorney Leon was speaking about until they've reviewed and approved your application and the technical components of what you do. Then after the bids are received, the DEP also reviews all the bids that are received from the contractors and issued what's called a permission to award, authorization to award. And that comes out that basically says they've looked at all the bids, they've looked at the information that was reviewed and submitted by the city, and that they concur that the projects that are done are in compliance with their past approvals and are necessary to meet the consent decree and are eligible for reimbursement through the SRF program. So there's a very prescriptive process that happens, as Attorney Leon said, across the entire state. Every city that wants to borrow this money goes through that process.
I wanted you to put that out there so that the citizens would know that this is not just somebody hiring their friend who happens to be a contractor in the drainage work.
Oh, no.
Okay, the only other thing I have is it doesn't sound like my colleague's amendment is going to interfere with any progress of or interfere in any way with any of the work going on
No, the reviews are welcome. I think that the deadline that's important every year to keep in mind is April 1st. If we don't have executed contracts by April 1st, the city loses out on principal forgiveness. In addition to the savings that we received so far, again, the city's received almost $2.7 million in principal forgiveness from DEP through the process by meeting that April 1st deadline. If you don't make that April 1st deadline, you lose out on that additional subsidy that DEP provides.
That's a gift, in other words,
Correct.
Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Reardon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the latitude to speak before the subcommittee. I'm taking the long view in this situation. I really don't have any specific questions, but in regard to the what we're proposing here tonight, and I haven't heard my brother's amendment yet. I'm sure he'll enlighten me before the meeting in a few minutes. But in as much as we're here at the 11th hour, and in fact, I'd probably call it about 11:59 p.m. for this appropriation, we are. While I'm sure the answers to the questions and the questions we've asked here have added some enlightenment, as you know, Bob, I propose that we get some sort of a summit together in the fall. 3 years into this project, and understanding that when we first started it, we knew we had a problem, but we didn't know what the nature of that problem was specifically, to the pipes, to the sewage, to the infiltration, and all these other questions that we've had an education on up till now. But I certainly hope by the fall that we will have an opportunity to look at this whole issue from a point of view of having had some success both in remediation and in investigation. So I would hope that would be something we could do. And I certainly, as I said, I believe my colleagues are in agreement that we need such a summit. And we need it before the 11th hour next year when we have to start sitting down and doing the same thing. And I'm going to ask my colleagues over the summertime that they prepare some questions that we can give you fellas in advance, so that when you come in here, it won't be a situation of, well, we don't have that information yet, we got to go back and get that information, and we have meeting and meeting and meeting over and over on these pick-a-own little issues instead of having everything done at once. So I'm hoping, Mr. Chairman, that you and my other colleagues will acquiesce to that request that we have in the fall. Again, I think the fall is appropriate time. Really a hard look at this with real hard questions, and hopefully come up with some answers and project out to the future where we're going to be, say, 3 or 4 years from now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Very well said. Just question for you. Tonight, Council President asked a question of how much was spent. I've been trying to get that for 2 months. You just said it here. First time I ever heard it. I don't know if other councils heard it. First time I heard it was just now. So evidently you knew it was spent. But a follow-up question is that we saved $3 million. Okay, forgiveness is $2.7 million. That's $5.7 million. We all agree right now we bonded and haven't spent yet. Never mind not knowing, what it was spent on. So where is the 5.7 floating around?
Sure. You authorized the $31.7 million to borrow. It wasn't necessarily fully spent in that when the final bids come in, that your actual borrowing, your actual debt service on the final construction costs is what the final costs are. So if you borrowed $1 and your costs come in at 80 cents, you only pay back the 80 cents. You don't pay back the full $1. So that extra money that's been saved has been authorized to borrow but hasn't actually been borrowed. So that's the difference.
So then the money was saved on the percentage of money we had to pay back, not on the work that was saved.
There's two things.
So,
you borrowed less because your bids have come in less, number one. And then number two, the principal forgiveness is above and beyond the savings. The DEP, through the Treasurer's Office, has kicked in an additional subsidy because Revere is an environmental justice community and because you have the needs that you do. The state's stepped up and given you about 10% of the total borrowing to date as a principal forgiveness. Not every community gets that. There's very few on an annual basis that do, and Revere has gotten it every single year that you've applied for.
but in reality, at the end of the day, there's $5.7 million that we have appropriated to bond for some work or to pay back these notes that we, as a city, either don't have to pay back those loans in full, or we could use it for more work to be done in the ground. So
Correct. And we're working with DPW on some potential additional projects that they want to do. Some gravity pipe, for example, to replace a storm pump station that's a problem. So we are, in fact, going back and looking at some of those savings and saying, can more work be done?
Now, the other thing, Bob, is you knew right off the top of your head when Council President asked you the question, 28 million. And
Yep.
I've been trying to get that like pulling teeth here like a dentist and haven't gotten it, but it come out very fluently. So do we know where the money was spent? We must have a checks and balance of where that money was spent and to who. Because that's the other information I've been looking for. I haven't received one of it in 3 months here, waiting for it. So I think Council Reardon said it. I think there's no hurry for this summit until we get all the information. Because we don't have information, it's tough to ask questions. And when you come up here, you find like pulling teeth here, and then you get more information, and then you have more questions on top of questions. But, you know, all the money we're spending in the DEP and all this talk we just talked about, a lot of it's how you do the work. I sat in the mayor's office downstairs when he came up with the emergency work for Winthrop Ave. And that's what this whole thing all stems with me. It's the first project I was involved in from day one. $1 million is going to be needed for this project. Even though you took a film of it 4 years ago, didn't know there was a problem, there was a problem, major problem. All of a sudden comes an emergency situation. It went up to $1.5 million. Council appropriated $2 million for that project. 2 weeks before, 3 months after it's supposed to have been done, we're still engaged with it. Met in this council chambers. 2 weeks left of the project. You told us you should be done in 2 weeks. So nothing should have been emergency, nothing should have been unknown with 2 weeks left to a project. And all of a sudden, 3 or 4 weeks later, you come up here and say, I need another 2 weeks, which went longer than that. So that's why I'm skeptical about this whole thing, how work is done and how much money. And now you'll say $2 million spent, oh, we saved money, we didn't spend it all. It's very simple to ask for $10,000, you know, when it's going to cost $7,500. I mean, to me, I think the estimate was poor judgment, didn't have a handle on it, and that's just me saying that. But that project, I lost a lot of credibility in this whole thing. We can appropriate the money we want to spend right, and I'm going to get to one other point, because this thing sticks with me. Sub pump money, we spent it twice. We appropriated money for sub pumps. There's 12,000 meters in this city, not 12,000 sub pumps. And the ones that have called you will have a sub pump. 1/3 of those were already told were not illegal, they're legitimate. But here's my problem. You go on CDM's webpage, right on with the Revere, it says Revere Water Department. Water billing will take care of the illegal sub pump and how many need it and where they need it. Makes a lot of sense. Now, 2015, whoever came up with that date was so generous it's unbelievable. Have these people pumping illegal stuff, and we're going in to pay for it, and asking them to go, we started this a year ago, to 2015 December. It's totally ludicrous to me. Totally unacceptable, very poor planning, but on top of that, we voted for new meters to go in every single house. Wouldn't that be the time you just follow the leader into the house and see you have an illegal pump? Doesn't make sense why you're going to pay millions of dollars to do this work. That's why I'm saying, you know, planning is planning. Poor planning is even worse. But I mean, you need a plan to get into it. When we have poor planning and spend money because Revere, an open book, just keep spending it. I'm not an engineer, but I can tell you if I got to get in a house for one thing, I'm going to have someone there document another. And those are the things that stick in my throat, little things that make these big pictures scare me. And I think that's why we're going to get to the bottom of it. And, you know, any other, Councilor Hash, you had a question?
Just one question, Mr. President. As far as the $27 million that we bonded, all right, is there any way, once we're done with the expenditures, we close out that loan order?
Yes.
Not keep it open, but physically just close it out.
Yes, and there's a process that the DEP goes through to do that, Councilor. So we've started that for the first year of construction to close out those loans. What we've been trying to make sure is that there isn't some other problem that the city can fix. The DPW director, for example, has had a couple of issues that we're trying to use some of that leftover money for. to fix problems that he hasn't been able to get to. But yes, they can be closed out. That is another part of the process.
As a city council, if I'm bonding X amount of dollars, I want to make sure that it includes A, B, C.
Yes.
Now, if you come up with a savings of $5 million, close it out. Not that Donnie would come up and find out other uses for those funds. Have him come up with another loan order. This way here, everything is straight.
Yep. That you could do it either way. That's the city's choice in terms of how they would do that.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Council Morabito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my question, I have a couple sets of questions. I think my first question refers to the plan itself and whether the city was told that there would be these investigation costs, $5.6 million.
Yes, part of the consent decree does identify the study phase, the evaluation phase, and obviously those steps are also going to cost money. In the first years of the city's commitments under the CD, there was a lot more investigation. The actual investigation began before the consent decree was even executed. As I mentioned to you, there was an administrative order in 2007. Even under that administrative order, there were obligations to conduct an evaluation of the system. At the time the decree was entered into, the results of that entire study were not even known to the city. So the city, as I think one councilor mentioned earlier, was at that point not even fully informed of the magnitude of the problem. But those studies are going to be part of the budget costs.
Now, do we have a number on the cost of emergency repairs that was versus anticipated during the investigation phase?
Yes, we have the numbers. The auditor has all of the numbers for spending to date in terms of what's been budgeted and then what's been either spent or encumbered. So we do have all those. I don't have all of them right at the top of my head, but we do have, the city does have that information available to them. The repairs themselves changed a little bit during the process because the original repair to upsize the pipe would have cost tens of millions of dollars more when you upsized it all the way up through Broadway. So you have to be cognizant of the change in plans that the city wanted to do. But as part of this summit, we can provide you with all that information. I'd be happy to go through the detail of that when we come before you again.
Absolutely. But so when we first, because the city creates the schedule of plan, correct?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
The city creates the schedule and the plan, correct? With you.
Correct. We work together. Nothing is submitted without the city's review and approval. That's correct.
So was an average of emergency repairs given, like in the sense of, have you said, well, you should anticipate an emergency cost because in our past experience, this is, there can be a delay in the job due to emergency costs.
The real complexity of Winthrop Ave was the MWRA water mains in terms of trying to work around those, to work on the sewer that was 25 feet below them. That was really what caused the challenges, and there's not a lot of repeatability. That's a pretty unique situation in terms of the specific problem that you had on Winthrop Ave. So it's not like you can sort of put an average to it because it was far from an average repair or an average problem. In terms of the value of emergency repairs or the value of repairs, it's definitely much cheaper to fix things on an annual basis. If you look at an asset management program where you do a certain amount of preventative maintenance on an annual basis to try to keep it from falling apart, to actually keep it in reasonable working condition, you're looking at spending 1.5% to 2% of the value of your asset on an annual basis. And those are from many national professional organizations, their recommendations. If you look at 120 miles of pipe, sewer pipe only within the city, plus your pump stations, that has an asset value of $175 to $200 million in terms of the cost of the pipe that's in the ground. It's a very, very valuable system. So under that scenario, just an average annual repair bill would be in the order of $3.5 to $4 million, just to sort of keep up with a good state of repair, much like you would in your automobile, changing the oil and the tires and that type of thing. So it's important that you keep up with those minimums. And then in Revere's case, because of the problems of the consent decree, not only do you have to keep up with the minimum, but then you have to fix the other problems that have been let go for decades in many instances.
Okay. So where do we stand as of right now on, like, emergency repairs? How much time have we lost in the project?
Well, if I just put information, correct me if I'm wrong, besides Winter Bev is the only emergency situation we really had. The DPW, Water Department, does a lot of emergency, over in the middle of the night and everything else. Now, does that money, to answer Council Morabia's question, does that money go towards a consent order every time? Because I know they have to send a form to the DEP every minute of work they do. So is that going towards that consent order?
As Councilor,
that's all emergency work, a lot of it.
As Attorney Leon said earlier, the DEP doesn't necessarily focus on the dollars. They want to make sure that you're keeping your system in good working order and good repair. So if the DPW is out fixing problems on an emergency basis, we absolutely report that and take credit for it on behalf of the city towards the consent decree, but they expect you to keep the system in a certain operating condition, and that's what they're looking for.
Council Moravia.
They might not pay attention to the dollar, but our citizens definitely pay attention to every dollar we spend. So with the time setback versus time setback, emergency repairs, I guess my question is, have cities in the past changed their plans? And what warrants a change in plan?
Yes, they do. There's a small history of consent decrees. There's a fairly large body of law and consent decrees across the United States over the last 15 or 20 years. There are lots of things that have come up over the course of history with municipalities having to change their schedule and their plans. Portsmouth, New Hampshire, for example, had a plan and a schedule that they developed and submitted to EPA, and when they began construction of some of the improvements, discovered that there was an enormous amount of rock and ledge, unforeseen and unknown at the time, caused the project cost to skyrocket. It took another 2 years to be able to achieve their objectives, and obviously there was an impossibility. They were unaware of those conditions, and there was some accommodation to extend their timetable and modify the project. It frankly cost more, but they had a longer period of time to solve the problem. Even then, it still took a significant process for EPA and the city to get approval from the court for an adjustment of that schedule. It's a difficult topic because obviously I side with the city of Revere. I'm very sympathetic. I realize that the city has a lot of competing demands for the limited resources and money that the city has. My personal view is that I think EPA has traditionally been unreasonable and unwilling to listen to cities like Revere and other communities in Massachusetts who have a lot of other things they'd like to do with that money, including the ordinary repairs. I do want to point out that although I'm sure every ratepayer in every city thinks that they're paying more than anybody else, when you look at the statewide numbers, the city of Revere's water and sewer bills are right in the middle. They're not excessive, they're not crazy, nor are they the cheapest in the MWA of the Commonwealth, but it's very, very small solace for people who are paying water and sewer bills. I appreciate that. But I think it's important to understand that, as Mr. Button indicated, the milestones that are set out in the consent decree and the actual projects that are proposed for annual implementation are developed by the city. We pick. We just have 10 years to get our system up to par. There's another whole set of obligations that I'm sure you've heard about in the past, and that is that even though we still have the obligation to repair our system to make it work as well as it can, there's another problem that the consent decree asks us to solve, and that is that right now we're experiencing backups in our sewer system, in part because we generate more wastewater than is ever going to be expected, and it can't fit into the MWA system. So the DEP and EPA would expect this city to build and other facilities effectively to hold back, to store some of this excess stormwater during wet weather conditions. I think that the City Council is aware that the consent decree requires us to solve that problem, as well as all the leaky pipes, all the illegal connections, all the flooding basements. There's a twofold problem that we're going to be asked to solve. Our goal is to make that project come in, all those works collectively to come in as reasonably cheaply as possible, as cost effectively as possible, and on a timetable that's reasonable for the city. And there's a big battle ahead with EPA to try to reach agreement on what's feasible and what's reasonable, now that we know everything we do about the magnitude of the problem in the city.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Morbido. Councilor Novoselsky.
Oh, you have? I just wanted to close by
Sorry,
saying...
because the council president's being very patient over here before half hour into this meeting, but go ahead.
I understand why Councilor Chairman Penter put this into committee because, and I commend Councilor Reardon for calling for a summit, because when we can actually have a number of how much we spend in emergency costs, we're going to have to revisit that plan or see if we can revisit it in the future.
Thank you, Councilor Novoselsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Bob Button, please. Bob, I can understand 908 and 909. You know, that's understood. But I'm looking at the $15 million in 910, 3910. When we started working on this several years ago, in 08, 09, we were told that we would have to put up at least $7.5 million a year for 10 years. Now, here we are, you know, 3 or 4 years into the program. Last year, I think we had to put $10 million into it instead of the 7.5. Now we're putting double into it. Why such a huge increase in a few years?
As several have said before me, in the comprehensive plan that was submitted to the EPA, we laid out a series of projects. It so happens, based on the investigation work that we did last year, we found a number of pretty serious issues through the city, major inflow sources, for example, in some of those county ditch areas that Councilor Powers was speaking about earlier. So for next year's construction, for that reason and a couple of other projects that have been identified through the city, we asked for some additional money so we could do additional work next year based on what we felt was necessary and what was needed.
Understood. Thank you. And on 2 projects that I'm looking at, I'm looking at the status of the Dick Street pump station. And that sewer pump station that's supposed to go down there. And the other issue is that county ditch behind Shaw's and Standish Road. I've been trying to get that cleaned out for 8 years. And it's terrible what's in there. I know they had a problem in there when they started to do it in 04. And that's when they stopped, and that was the last time they did any work down in that particular location, in that stretch. Now, I know I had the MBTA clean out the county ditch along the Blue Line last year, because I asked them to do that, and Secretary Davey was very helpful in that, and I thank him for that. And but the water can't go anywhere if that Shaw's trench or ditch is loaded. The water doesn't go anywhere, so now it's coming back into, and when there's a large inflow of rain that comes down off the hill, it settles down in that area and goes into the people's backyards now. Yes. So can you help me with that?
Yes, I know that the mayor's office has been working on scheduling some meetings with DCR to try to deal and get some of their support, as well as Mass DOT. Similar to the MBTA, they contribute to some of these problems in the ditches. So what we're trying to do to be cognizant of the amount of money that the city is spending, as I said in previous hearings, is not spend money on assets or resources that don't belong to the city, like some of the ditches, you know, so that you're not spending money where you could otherwise direct it to your system. But you're right on point that if those systems aren't functioning, then it creates a burden into the city's system. So we try to sort of balance that, and if there was a driving need to fix something that caused a major catastrophe within the city's system, the city has sort of stepped up and done that. But as a general rule, we're trying to make the agencies that own the assets responsible for their operation and maintenance.
On the county ditch behind Shaw's again, we've always put money into it
excuse me, through Northeast Mosquito Control, and they've done a lot of the cleaning out in certain areas. Who really owns that ditch? Mass DOT, it's a Suffolk County ditch.
It's tied up in the whole county, state agency, and when you look at some of that stuff, it shows Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and it doesn't even differentiate within the various state agencies. So the ownership in those ditches is not totally clear, depending on where you are.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councilor Janino.
Thank you. So I'm a little bit confused as to why we're even having this meeting, because basically we've all asked a lot of questions and got a lot of responses, but I don't see any new answers to what we had in the last meeting. And I think the bottom line is here that we expected to meet tonight and have a breakdown of the last millions of dollars that we've spent. And, when you're working with this many $1 million, I expect more than just a small outline. I really wanted to see the expenditures and where this is going to, and I think it's a little sad that we don't have that. And as a company, Bob, you guys have done a fantastic job really educating us with the PowerPoints and the slideshows, and have done so many multimedia presentations with us that we really understand the work you're doing. But I think that, the important thing when it comes down to it is the money that we're voting on that our taxpayers are paying back, and I'm a little disappointed that we don't have the same sort of detail when it comes to that. I find it really hard to vote on $16.9 million when I don't know how the last bunch was spent, but I look forward to hopefully getting this breakdown, because it's very frustrating from my end. And honestly, I think we could have asked these questions in the last meeting and dragged it out longer, because there's really nothing new that we're getting from right now. But thank you.
Council, just for your information, that I think every councilor up here agrees with you. Unfortunately, Mr. Leone represents the city in this and says we get in jeopardy. But we are going to put an amendment on this, that not one red cent of this money can be spent unless they come back to the council and says we're doing this project and ask for X amount of dollars. So this would be pieced out as jobs go along. So just to stay in the consent order and stay in good faith, there are a lot of questions. And we keep asking, we don't get any answers. And the more we ask, we get a little here and there. But I agree with you. I think with that being said, that I talked to the financial director. The mayor called for a summit. We're going to have it in a couple weeks. But I tend to agree with Council Reardon. I think 2 weeks is too soon. This money is already appropriated, so it's not an emergency issue to have this before this vote goes through. So I would just ask that a lot of councils put questions in, either to the clerk or to the department heads that need some questions. And I think there should be a list, and I'm going to put a list together of people that should be here. I mean, we should have, the people that are here in the room right now, Donnie Goodwin, maybe we get someone from DEP, I don't know. I'll call DEP myself, MWRA. You get as many people that know about this consent order and everything, and we're going to get this out on the table and see where we're going from there. But Mr. Leone, just one last question, because you seem to have a figure. 6.5 million gallons of wastewater, as waste, going back. How much, and then you said how much illegally is really going in there. Do we have a figure of what actually is being pumped out? How many millions of extra gallons that we're paying for illegally?
The question of what's legal and illegal, if you're talking about units, no. I'm not familiar with the breakdown of individual household generation. I mean, I know what the state numbers are. My own reaction, my own impression of what's going on here is that most of what you're paying for is a lot of groundwater, a lot of roof leaders, a lot of basement water that's going into the collection system. If all of that were stripped out, the city's problem would be substantially lower. You'd also be paying less for the MWA because you don't be paying for the treatment.
No, I agree. When this is all said and done, we should be saving astronomical money. My point is seawater is going there. I heard hundreds of millions of gallons is going into MWRA.
Right.
There's stuff going all over the place.
Right.
But I think that, does anybody have a hold? I mean, we must know how many gallons are going in and probably what we should be paying. I mean, we must have meters across here that what we are paying for, they're charging us X amount for so many gallons. So somebody has to have that figure.
The city gets, through the city engineer, gets a monthly summary from MWRA of all your flows, and they have daily information as well as monthly summaries. So you are able to see sort of what's going through the meter that you just referred. What you can also see is the influence of a real wet month. You can see in March or April, for example, that the numbers are higher than they are in August or September when you don't have the snow melt and the high groundwater. So you can see in the numbers some of the things that you're referencing, Counselor, but you can't say that, 1 gallon came from this house and 3 gallons came
No,
from here.
I understand it. My point is this. Every household here gets a meter that I'm using 10 gallons a day.
Yes.
How much I discharge? Am I discharging 5 gallons, 4 gallons? If it's 12 gallons, then I got a serious problem somewhere. And it seems to me like that's what's happening to our whole system, is that we're over and above even more water we're taking in, of course, from stormwater. I can understand that. But what percentage of all those different factors? I mean, somebody has to have that number. Maybe it's MWRA. I don't know. But that being said, this meeting went off 40 minutes longer than I thought. Council President, this meeting's going to come to an end. And George, like I said, 2 weeks I think is too early. I think we'll push that off. And
Sometime in the fall is fine with the council.
I would say September, October would be fine.
Mr. Chairman, are you
Council
going to take a
President.
vote on whether to
Well,
recommend
it has to be a committee as a whole to take a vote. I can't. Oh, committee vote? Yeah, we'll take a committee vote to appropriate this with the amendment that no money is to be spent unless they come back in front of the council for a majority vote. Councilor Rigo.
Yes.
Councilor Granasso.
Yes.
Councilor Morabito.
Yes.
Myself, yes. So it's unanimous as far as the committee is concerned. This meeting has adjourned.
The president votes yes.
Council President votes yes, so it's still unanimous.